Okay, y'all. This one's probably going to be a little longer than the other ones I've posted. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. We'll find out, I guess. Um, this is the first time I've ever written an action sequence. It is the first time I have ever attempted to do a UK adjacent accent. You'll hear that later. Sorry in advance. And I'm just generally nervous about this one. This is the first time I have ever tried to narrate anything, and I am not in the habit of letting the general public see my writing. So I don't know how any of this is going, and maybe y'all should tell me. All right, then. Here we go. How Eamon Met Kaidan. Chapter 12. Thalmor-controlled fort in the rift. Fredas, the 24th of Evening Star, in the 201st year of the Fourth Era. Eamon. Eamon needed to pull himself together. Every part of him yearned to turn around and run for Eastmarch to find Amelia, but he'd made promises to Fjodir and to this room full of men who didn't deserve whatever it was the Thalmor would do to them. There was work to finish here, and he'd come this far. In for a silver, in for a septum. Eamon looked back over at the man who'd seen Amelia in the other prison. He'd learned the man's name was Orden, that he was a fisherman from the backwater wetlands of Hjalmarch, and that the Thalmor had arrested him as he was tying his boat to the dock in broad daylight. They told me I was wanted for questioning as a Talos worshipper. I told them that my family has never worshipped Talos and that Zenithar and Mother Mara are the only gods I pray to, but they didn't listen. Honestly, I don't think they even cared about my religion. They hauled me to Eastmarch, tossed me into a cell, and the only questions any of them ever asked me were about my family history. Eamon asked Orden to tell him anything else he could remember about the prison in Eastmarch. I didn't think about it at the time, but looking back on it, all of the men I can remember from there were like us. He gestured with his hand around the room. What do you mean? Eamon asked. Orden raised an eyebrow, incredulous. You don't see it? Look at us. We could all be kin. He was right. Eamon turned to really look at them all for the first time, and it was uncanny how similar they were. Dark hair, taller than average, and every one of them had a swarthy complexion. Orden continued, but there was a man in that first place who stood out. Huge bastard. He was tall and dark like the rest of us, but I don't think he was a Nord. His skin was dark by birth, not the sun, and he had red eyes. Red eyes? Eamon asked. Yeah, Orden said. I don't mean red like a dark elf. He was definitely a human of some kind, and I don't mean bloodshot like a man who's had too much to drink. I mean the natural color of his eyes was a bright snowberry red. They kept him off separate, same as your woman, and they didn't bring him with us when we left Eastmarch. This man, Eamon said, was he a mage or a healer? Anything to do with magic? Not that I could see, Orden said. And I trust you take my meaning when I say he didn't look like the magical sort. Orden looked Eamon up and down before explaining. He was a good head taller than any Nord I've ever seen, at least as tall as your kind, maybe even taller, and he was built like a stone wall. Between that and his eyes, I tell you, I've never seen his like. I don't know what they wanted with that man, but they were on him, like flies on a cowpat, and I don't think it had anything to do with magic. They kept Amelia with this man, Eamon asked. Orden shook his head. Not exactly, but he was kept in a cell separated from everyone else. So was she, and both of them got worse treatment than the rest of us. Orden paused before looking up with an expression of deep sympathy that made Eamon feel sick. I'm sorry to say it, but they hurt her, no mistake. After that, well, the red-eyed man got a hold of one of the ones who did it. He fell on that elf with an animal rage like nothing I have ever witnessed. Killed him with his bare hands. The guards beat him something savage after that. I honestly couldn't say if he was alive or dead once they were done with him, and they carted the rest of us out of there the next morning. You said you came here with other prisoners from Eastmarch. Where are they? What happened to the rest of them? Eamon asked. Orden's eyes looked over at the stairs that led down from this room to another level below. They were taken down there, he said. And like Thorn told you, they didn't come back up. Eamon began to pace the room to get his rage and fear for Amelia back in check. He needed to think. He needed a plan to release the prisoners, to rescue the kitchen boy, and hopefully escape without alerting the entire garrison. But he was running out of time, and he couldn't afford any mistakes. He pushed more magic into his injured shoulder and asked, "Do you know where they keep the key to these cells?" Thorn spoke up again. "Nasty fucker named Tikar. We call him Ticker to piss him off. He got here with the boys from Eastmarch. He's the one who keeps the key." "What does he look like?" Eamon asked, still trying to pulse healing into his ruined shoulder. "He's one of them," Thorn said. He meant Altmer, and Eamon knew it, but he appreciated being excluded from any description of the Thalmor. Thorn continued. "His head is shaved, completely bald, and he's got a burned mark on one of his ears." Eamon jerked his eyes back to Thorn at this last bit of information. "On his ear? What does it look like?" Thorn shrugged. "I haven't seen it up close, but it's round, and it looks like someone put it there on purpose." "They put that brand on him at the other prison," Orden said. Eamon turned. "The brand on his ear. You saw this?" Orden nodded. "He was one of the elves who hurt your woman. The boss elf found out about it and burned their ears as punishment." Eamon snarled. "One of the elves who hurt her. God's Rama." He wondered briefly if maybe this Tikar was one of the elves he'd killed on his way down to this room, but Thorn dispelled that notion by saying, "Ticker stays down below. He only comes up now and again to give us bread. They send a boy in here sometimes to give us water. But we asked him if he would help us, and he said he doesn't have a cell key." "I met the boy," Eamon said, "and the only key he's got is the one he gave me to open the gate to come down here." "Tell me you didn't hurt that innocent child." There was a threat in Thorn's tone. "Of course I didn't," Eamon snapped. "What do you take me for? And the boy's name is Fjodir. No one saw me with him, and he's safe in his quarters for the night by now." "Well then," Thorn said, ignoring Eamon's peek, "we're going to have to get the key from Ticker." Feeling was returning to Eamon's injured arm now, and he began to slowly rotate the shoulder and flex his fingers to get the blood flowing. It hurt. Thorn spoke again. "Listen, I don't know much about magic or healing, but you still look like a stiff breeze could knock you over, and you're the only chance at getting out of here I've seen. Don't fuck it up by getting ahead of yourself." It was sage advice, to be sure, but time was of the essence. Whatever was to be done must happen before dawn, and between now and then lay a gauntlet of obstacles and potential failures. As Eamon recovered his energy for casting, he considered his options. There were at least 3 more guards down there, plus this mer called Tikar, 4 at the very least, and he couldn't discount the possibility of more. One at a time, there were very few people on Nirn who could defeat Eamon without some element of surprise or superior magic, so the only real danger was allowing himself to be overwhelmed by numbers. 3 was clearly pushing it. His close brush with losing an arm was testament to that. 4 would be foolhardy, and if there were any more, he'd likely fail. Amelia's life was at stake, and Gregor's voice flooded his thoughts. "You can, because you must. And you must, because if you don't, she will be the one who doesn't survive it." Failure could not be entertained. "Orden," Eamon asked, "if you were to bang on your cell bars and yell for Ticker, how many do you think would come up here? Would he come alone?" "Probably," Orden said. "The other guards don't like dealing with us, and I get the impression they make him do it because he's new." "No," Eamon said dryly. "They make him do it because he's being punished." Another prisoner from across the room said, "It's worth a shot. Even if someone else comes with him, I don't think they'd all come." The men were all standing up now, having overcome their initial hesitance to speak to this new Altmer in their midst. "I'll do it," said another. "I want out of here, and if splitting them up is how we do that, I'm game." Eamon rolled his shoulders again, cleared his mind, and said, "I'm ready. Make some noise, gentlemen." The resonant clang of metal against metal sounded in 3 sharp raps, and one of the men yelled out, "Are you trying to starve us, Ticker? When do we get our bread?" They waited as the clanging echoed down into the silence, and every man in the room held his breath until the sound of footsteps from below came up and broke the tension. The prisoner called out again for good measure, "Oi, wakey, wakey, tree fucker." An Altmeri accented voice responded from below, growing louder and closer. "We don't fuck trees, you idiot mongrel. You're thinking of the Bosma, and they are almost as base as you are." The elf called Ticker emerged from the stairwell, and he was so occupied with the basket of bread in his hands that he didn't see Eamon until after the first blow had already hit him. A frozen magical wind made Ticker drop his burden, which sent the round loaves rolling in all directions across the floor. The blast of it slammed Ticker against the wall, and Eamon rushed in to cover his mouth before he could make enough noise to alert any guards. Ticker's eyes wrinkled in confusion when he first saw that his assailant was an Altmer. Eamon had one hand over Ticker's mouth and the other at his throat, both hands glowing with magic that flowed around and through them. "Don't make a sound unless it's to answer my questions. I can and will freeze the blood in your veins. Do you understand?" Ticker nodded. "Where is the key to the cells?" Eamon asked. Ticker's brow furrowed at this, and his eyes narrowed in resistance, so Eamon pulsed again with the words of wind, forcing the icy magic down Ticker's throat. "Do you want to die, Tikkar?" Eamon asked. "It is a very simple question. You give me the key, you live. You don't give me the key, I send you to the ancestors with that brand on your ear, and I take the key. I get the key, either way. So the choice is entirely yours." Panic fought with defiance on Ticker's face until self-preservation won the argument. He jerked his head to indicate the key was in his pocket. "Take the key from your pocket and place it here in mine. And don't try my patience. You will not win if you try to cross me." Ticker believed him, and so he complied. The key now safely in his robes, Eamon looked at the brand on Ticker's ear and whispered, A blood traitor, eh?" Eamon clicked his tongue in sarcastic disapproval. "What did you do, Tikkar, to end up down here, playing servant to a bunch of Ephems and marked for the rest of your life as an Aprax? I really want to know. Tell me." Ticker tried to speak, but his throat was still closed off by the magic. Eamon thinned out his flow to allow Ticker's answer when one of the men behind him burst out in frustration. "Stop playing with him, Eamon. Just kill him and be done with it." Eamon closed his eyes in frustration at this interruption, and Ticker jerked at the mention of his name. Eamon turned a molten glare on the prisoner until the man lifted his hands in a placating gesture and nodded. With enough air now to let out a harsh whisper, Ticker said, "Eamon, well now, how interesting." Eamon pushed more energy into the magical winds that were keeping Ticker pinned to the wall and said, "Do you think you know me, little blood traitor?" The revolting elf sniffed in derision and said, "No, but we saddle broke a little sweetmeat who does." Eamon stiffened, and Ticker wheezed a choked bark of laughter. "We showed her that a Breton's place is beneath an Altmer." The room went silent at this, and Eamon growled, "Who is we?" And it was here that the full weight of his predicament finally seemed to penetrate Ticker's awareness. For the first time, a brief flash of fear spread over his face. Even a simpleton like Ticker can recognize the end when it's staring him in the face, and the hard mirror glass of Eamon's stare carried a solemn promise of a swift and violent one. Ticker decided to appeal to a fellow Altmer's sympathy.
A mer out here goes for months without even seeing a Wenmer, and there she was, soft and sleeping, with just enough elven blood to smell like a real Wen, not like these Nordic sows that cover all of Skyrim with their stench. You don't have to ask me, Kinsmer. You know what we did.
Eamon controlled his breathing and repeated the question. Who is we?
My patrol, Ticker said. Gale was left in Eastmarch. Lucan and I were sent here.
So, where is this Lucan while you were serving bread and cleaning up after men?
Lucan's father is one of the wise. He's being sent to his kin for his punishment on the next ship to Alinor. I don't know where they're holding him in the meantime.
Eamon leaned in even closer now, putting his mouth next to Ticker's branded ear, so close that it was a grotesque mockery of a lover's embrace. I only have one more question, Tickar, and then you and I will be done. Ticker jerked his head away, trying to get distance, but Eamon braced him even more firmly against the wall, pressing his entire body against the struggling elf, with his face so close that Ticker could feel Eamon's breath on his eyelashes.
Tell me how it is that you know my name.
A spiteful recklessness reared its head and gave birth to the final mistake that Ticker would ever make in a life he had dedicated to making them. He turned into Eamon and whispered,
I was never really sure you understand, because we slapped her silent every time she screamed, but it sounded an awful lot like Eamon.
Eamon nodded slowly and backed away, but he didn't remove his hand from Ticker's throat. Instead, he slowly raised the other hand back up to cover Ticker's mouth, and the only sound was the rustling of straw and the fallen loaves of bread as they rolled and swirled in the gusts of magic that were gaining speed and power all around the room. For the first time in a long time, and maybe for the first time ever, Eamon gave himself up wholly to his magic. He didn't contain it, he didn't control it, he didn't regulate it or temper it or measure his pull on the magicka. He opened his body and let it flow without restraint. He became vaguely aware of shouts and movement, but Ticker was still underneath his hands, and that was the only thing that mattered. A loud cracking sound filled the room, and then Ticker was suddenly gone. In his confusion at this sudden change, Eamon saw that there were other Altmer in the room now. They were screaming, but they were not moving. They stood frozen in place where their feet had touched the frozen fury that Eamon's hands continued to pour out all over the floor. Eamon opened his mouth and roared out all of the fear and adrenaline he'd been containing for 4 days, and the temperature continued to drop, and the magical wind grew so fierce and so bitter, the frozen mist produced by it so thick and impenetrable, that soon Eamon couldn't even see the other people in the room. Another booming crack came, and then another, and then another. Eamon's vision was blurred, but he pulled back on the threads of his magic and inhaled deeply through his nose. They were dead now. They were gone. The air cleared, and his vision slowly came back into focus. The smell of lingering magicka still filled his nose and mouth, but the only other evidence that violence had been done here were the drifts of discolored ice that looked like blood-soaked snow, and the disarray of the straw and the spilled loaves of bread that had been tossed about in his frenzied storm. The room was almost unnaturally quiet now.
Eamon,
Orden said. "The key, if you don't mind. After that display, not that I'm not grateful, mind, but Eamon, we need to leave this place before their buddies send a patrol down here. Get us out, now." The urgency of Orden's tone shook Eamon out of his haze. "Forgive me," he said, and quickly pulled the key from his front pocket where Ticker had placed it. He pressed it into the friendly marshlander's hand and asked, "Are you all right?" "All right? I don't think that's a word I'd use to describe it, no, but I believe I am uninjured." "Shore's bones, what was that? What did you do?" "I used my weapon of choice to kill an enemy, Orden. It's no different than a sword or a hammer. It is the weapon I have been trained to wield, and I will not apologize for it." This speech seemed to exhaust Eamon, and he sat down on an overturned bucket while Orden set to releasing himself. "With all due respect, Eamon Greywatch, that was very different than killing a man with a sword." Eamon, still dazed by all he'd just heard and done, quirked a grim smile and said, "Perhaps it was, but the end result is much the same." He watched in a detached way as Orden let each of the men out in turn, and almost unconsciously he began to reach out for threads of magicka to pull them back into himself. While he did this, he studied the prisoners. They were all very quiet, some looking directly at him with a mixture of fear or confusion. The others fastidiously avoided his gaze. Thorn was the last man to be released, and he walked solidly over to Eamon and once more put his large hand on the Altmer's shoulder. "Thank you," he said. "I'd begun to think the gods had abandoned us and we'd all die in these cages or by the Thalmor's hands downstairs. I am grateful to you." Eamon nodded and said, "I'm fairly certain there are no more left in here. You men will be safe for a moment. Gather yourselves, and you might want to locate some weapons. The guards I fought coming down here had swords. They may come in handy when you make your way to the exit." Thorn said, "Are you not coming with us?" "No," Eamon said. "I'm not done here. You do realize there are too many, don't you? We're not getting out of here, Eamon. We're all going to die tonight." Eamon considered this and said, "If you really believe that, Thorn, why did you thank me for getting you out?" Thorn's face lifted into a feral grin, and he said, "Because now we'll die in glorious battle, and Shore will tell his shield thane to give us passage into Sovngarde." "You know," Eamon said, "that's what I love about living among Nords." "What? Our optimism in the face of death?" Eamon chuckled and said, "I was going to say courage, but we can call it optimism if you prefer. But we aren't going to die today, Thorn. Not here." Thorn lifted his eyebrow in disbelief. "Are all of the Altmer this delusional, or just you?" Eamon stood and took a deep breath. "I made a promise to Fjodir, and I keep my promises. And you heard what Ticker said, what they did to her. If you think I will let any of them live after that, you've fallen to Sheogorath." Orden interrupted their tete-a-tete, saying, "Well, boys, we need a plan." Eamon handed him Fjodir's gate key and said, "Let me go out first and get up on the walls so I can check for patrols. When they're busy with me, you run for the exit and leave this place before they all come pouring out of that barracks. I will do everything I can to make sure the Thalmor forget they ever knew your names." The group followed Eamon up through the levels of the prison, and when they reached the gate, Thorn tried to reason with him one more time. "Let us help you. You can't do this alone." Eamon looked up at Thorn and then swept his eyes over each of the men. "No. You're all underfed and exhausted, and you've suffered enough. Stars guide you, gentlemen. Go home. They are mine." Then he cloaked himself, cracked open the gate, and stepped outside.